lived for over 100 years, and I've discovered many things, and I've felt many things. Life goes by fast, even at 100 years old. I remember when I was 30.
Loneliness has been my most faithful companion. It has followed me across decades. It has changed shapes. When I was younger, loneliness felt like failure, like exclusion. Now it feels more like space, a wide field where memory can move freely, where I can hear myself think, where the past visits gently instead of crashing in. There are nights when I miss people so deeply it feels physical, like a hand pressing against my chest from the inside. Friends, lovers, strangers who mattered for a season and then vanished. I let the feeling come. I don't rush it away. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. And love, I've learned, never disappears. It just changes form. My body has become a negotiation. Some days it cooperates, some days it refuses. I don't resent it. It carried me this far. That alone deserves respect. Pain is not an enemy. It is a message, a reminder that I am still here, still sensing, still alive. I no longer fear death the way I once did, not because I am brave, but because fear loses its urgency when you've already lost so much. Death feels less like a cliff now and more like a horizon, unavoidable, quiet, unknown, not cruel. What frightens me more is how afraid the young seem to be of stillness, of silence, of themselves. They fill every gap with noise, every pause with distraction. They run from emptiness without realizing emptiness is where understanding begins. If I could offer them anything, it wouldn't be answers. It would be permission, permission to slow down, to choose less, to feel deeply without needing to explain it, to live without constant validation. I regret nothing, not the risks, not the mistakes, not the loves that ended badly. Regret is a luxury of those who believe life owed them something different. Life owed me nothing, and yet it gave me everything I needed to become who I am. I have cried more than most people will ever know. I have laughed quietly when no one was around. I have forgiven people who never asked. I have carried truths that no one wanted to hear. I have lived invisibly for long stretches, and I am proud of that invisibility. It taught me who I was when no one was watching. Now, as I sit with the weight of 107 years behind me, I don't feel ancient. I feel distilled, reduced to essentials: breath, memory, awareness, gratitude. I am not waiting for anything anymore. Not redemption, not recognition, not meaning. Meaning arrived slowly, disguised as ordinary days. If this is the end, it is a gentle one, not because life was easy, but because I learned how to meet it without armor. And if tomorrow comes, I will greet it the same way I have greeted everything else for the past century, with honesty, with humility, with my head held high, and with a quiet, unshakable peace that only time can teach. I'm 107 years old. I was born in a small house with creaky floors and no insulation worth mentioning. I've lived through things people now only recognize as black and white footage. And it took me 76 years to learn what I'm about to tell you. That's the part that still stings. Not the wars, not the losses, not even the pain. It's how long it took me to understand something that was quietly waiting the whole time. For most of my life, I believed time was something you managed, like money, like chores, like a calendar you controlled if you stayed disciplined enough. I rushed everything. I rushed childhood. I rushed marriage. I rushed forgiveness. I rushed grief. I even rushed joy, afraid it might slow me down or make me soft. I grew up during the Great Depression. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about survival. You learned early not to complain, not because it was noble, because nobody had the energy to listen. That trained me to silence myself. And once you learn that, it follows you everywhere. I married young, not because I was deeply in love, but because that's what you did. He was kind, not gentle. There's a difference. We built a life, a house, children, responsibilities stacked on top of responsibilities. I told myself that was happiness. It took decades to realize I had never actually asked what happiness felt like to me. I spent years believing that endurance was the same thing as strength, that if I could tolerate something long enough, it would eventually become meaningful. That was a lie I told myself because leaving, changing, or admitting dissatisfaction felt selfish. Women like me were taught that self-erasure was virtue. I was 47 when I first noticed how tired I was, not physically, spiritually. I would sit at the kitchen table after everyone went to bed and feel this quiet heaviness in my chest. Not sadness exactly, more like absence. I ignored it. I called it adulthood. Then loss started arriving. Slowly at first. Parents, friends, familiar places. By the time I was 60, funerals outnumbered weddings, and still I hadn't learned the lesson. I was busy being useful, busy being dependable, busy being needed. I thought that was love. It wasn't until I was 76 that something broke open. My husband had been gone for 3 years. The house was too quiet. I remember standing in the hallway one morning and realizing no one knew how lonely I was, not because they didn't care, but because I had never let them see me. That's when it hit me, like a clean, unforgiving truth. I had spent my life performing stability instead of living honestly. I had confused being agreeable with being whole. I had postponed myself indefinitely. Here's what I learned. Listen closely. Time does not reward patience the way you think it does. It does not give prizes for waiting. It only reveals what you chose to ignore. Love that requires you to disappear is not love. It is convenience dressed up as loyalty. Being needed is not the same as being known, and being known is the only thing that actually fills the emptiness. I learned that resentment doesn't come from hatred. It comes from unspoken truth, from swallowing yourself too many times. I learned that people rarely regret what they did with courage. They regret what they tolerated out of fear. If I could go back, I would say no more often, not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. I would stop explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I would tell my younger self that loneliness inside a crowded room is the loneliest kind there is, and that peace is not found by keeping everyone comfortable. I learned too late that forgiveness is not about other people. It's about reclaiming your own energy. Carrying old pain doesn't make you loyal to the past. It just makes you tired in the present. At 82, I started doing something radical. I told the truth, gently, but without apology. I told my children when I was hurt. I told my friends when I was afraid. Some people pulled away. That hurt. But the ones who stayed finally saw me, and something incredible happened. The world didn't collapse. The sky didn't fall. I wasn't abandoned. I was lighter. Here's another thing nobody tells you. You don't need a dramatic turning point. You need honesty practiced daily. Quiet honesty, the kind that asks, is this life actually mine? I learned that joy is not loud. It's subtle. It's found in moments you allow yourself to fully inhabit. A walk without rushing. A conversation without performing. A morning without dread. I also learned that bitterness is a choice. A tempting one, but still a choice. Life will hurt you regardless. What you do with that pain determines whether you harden or soften if you're younger than me. And that includes almost everyone. Please understand this. You are not running out of time, but you are running out of postponements. Stop waiting for permission to be yourself. Stop assuming clarity will arrive. I'm 107 years old now, and after everything I've seen, everything I've survived, everything I misunderstood for far too long, I can say this with a steady heart. The most important wisdom of my life did not come from books or institutions or success. It came when I chose simplicity, when I stepped away from comfort, when I stopped chasing approval, when I lived closer to the ground and closer to other people's hearts. After I turned 77, something quiet but irreversible happened inside me. I had already learned the lesson about honesty, about truth, about not disappearing for the sake of peace. But I was still living inside habits built for a world that no longer fit me. Too much space, too many objects, too many reminders of who I used to be instead of who I was becoming. So I did something that shocked my family. I sold the house. I gave away almost everything. Furniture, dishes, clothes, things I had protected for decades as if they were extensions of my body. I moved into a small weathered cabin on the edge of a desert town where no one cared who I had been. No titles, no history, just a name. And even that didn't matter much. People called it reckless. They said I was too old for change. That comfort was something I had earned, but comfort had made me numb, and I wasn't interested in numbness anymore. I lived simply. No television, no constant noise, no schedule that demanded I perform usefulness. I woke with the sun. I slept when my body told me to. I cooked food with my hands. I fixed things instead of replacing them. I listened more than I spoke. And slowly, without drama, my mind became quieter than it had ever been. Here is something no one tells you. Luxury separates you from people. Simplicity brings you back. When you live with less, you see more. You notice how people talk when they're not trying to impress. You hear the pauses, the hesitations, the truths they almost say but swallow. When I lived simply, strangers spoke to me like I was invisible in the best way. They weren't guarded. They weren't performing. They were human. I met people with nothing who understood everything. Men who had slept in their cars but knew how to listen. Women who had lost children and still smiled with genuine softness. People who had been stripped of status but not of kindness. That's where I learned what the human heart actually needs. It doesn't need more options. It doesn't need more validation. It doesn't need more noise. It needs to be seen without being judged. It needs to rest without guilt. It needs meaning that doesn't depend on applause. Living simply taught me patience, not the kind that waits for something better, but the kind that accepts what is without resentment. I learned to sit with discomfort without trying to solve it immediately. I learned that boredom is not an enemy, it's a doorway. When you stop filling every silence, your inner voice finally has room to speak. I lived among people who would be labeled hippies by those who didn't understand them, people who valued presence over productivity, who believed meals were sacred, who treated time as something shared, not spent. They weren't escaping reality. They were refusing to let it harden them. I am 107 years old now, and there is something about crossing 100 that changes how the world looks at you and how it treats you. You stop being a person in their eyes and become a symbol, or a curiosity, or a burden they don't know how to carry. People speak about you instead of to you. They decide what you need without asking. They assume you are finished even though you are still awake inside. Living this long teaches you a painful truth. Longevity is not celebrated the way people imagine. It is tolerated, sometimes politely, sometimes awkwardly, often invisibly. At 107, the world moves around you at a speed that feels almost cruel. Not because you can't understand it, but because it no longer waits.